Rae Vance yanked the black suitcase off the baggage carousel with a grunt, barely dodging the guy behind her reaching for his own. "Sorry," she blurted, dragging the heavy thing behind her as the wheels screeched over the tile floor of JFK. She didn't notice that the man was staring at the bag in her hand, his brow furrowed. "Wait," he started. But Rae was already gone, weaving through the crowd, one hand gripping the handle of the suitcase she thought was hers, the other clutching a crumpled paper with the address of the tiny Airbnb she'd scrimped 3 months to afford. She was in New York for exactly 5 days, and she wasn't going to waste a second. She didn't realize until 3 hours later, after she'd hiked up 4 flights of stairs, opened the case to grab her charger, and found a neatly folded suit wrapped in plastic, a silver watch nestled in a velvet box, and a pair of leather shoes worth more than a month's rent that she'd taken the wrong bag. "Oh no," she breathed, staring at the monogrammed initials inside. DT, her stomach dropped. Across the city in a high rise overlooking Central Park, Dean Trenton stood in his designer kitchen, staring at a suitcase that definitely wasn't his. It smelled like lavender and had a broken zipper. Inside, 2 books, a polka dot blouse, a sketchpad filled with pencil drawings, and a half-eaten chocolate bar. He chuckled despite himself. "Well, Rae Vance," he murmured, reading the name on a scribbled scrap of paper stuck inside. "You've got my Hugo Boss, and I've got your snacks." Dean wasn't the type to get flustered. 31, CEO of Trenton Developments, and a multi-millionaire whose face never made the tabloids, not because scandals didn't try to follow him, but because he kept his life locked up tighter than his penthouse's security system. But something about the girl who'd grabbed his suitcase, the girl with wild reddish-brown curls and paint-smudged jeans, had thrown him off at the airport. Now he knew her name and her address. Rae was pacing the creaky wooden floor of her rented studio when the knock came. She flung open the door, still in her travel clothes, face flushed. "If this is about the noise, I'm really sore," but it wasn't the landlord, it was the man from the airport. Tall, dark blonde hair tousled in a way that looked too perfect to be accidental, a navy coat slung over his arm, and a suitcase in his hand, hers. "I think we traded," he said easily, holding up the lavender bag. Rae stared. "Oh my God, you followed me," he winced. "Okay, that sounded more stalker-y than intended. I'm Dean. You took my suitcase." She covered her face. "I'm so sorry, I didn't realize until I'm such an idiot." "You're not, it happens." "No, it doesn't, not to normal people, I mean." She paused, then narrowed her eyes. "Wait. How did you find me?" Dean held up the scrap of paper she'd left in the bag. "You left breadcrumbs," Rae groaned. "Right, I'm officially the dumbest tourist in Manhattan." Dean smiled. "Well, the dumbest tourist in Manhattan just saved me the trouble of a dry cleaner." "You didn't mess with the watch, did you?" "Honestly, I thought it was fake. I figured you were some kind of salesman." He laughed. "Not exactly, but you're not far off." Rae took her suitcase, her fingers brushing his. "Thanks for bringing it. I was about to take the subway across the city to return yours." "Then I saved you a trip," he said, glancing behind her. "This place yours?" "Just for the week. I'm visiting. Art student. Well, ex-art student. I'm in between things. Life, jobs, it's complicated." Dean studied her for a moment. "You hungry?" She blinked. "What?" "I assume you haven't eaten since the airport. Let me take you to dinner." Rae stared like he'd offered her a ticket to Mars. "You want to take me to dinner?" "I feel like I owe you for stealing your luggage." "I'm the one who stole yours." "Details," he said with a grin. "Come on, I know a place." Rae hesitated. Everything about him screamed polished and expensive, while she was still wearing sneakers with a hole in the toe. But something about the way he looked at her, curious, open, amused, made her think he wasn't used to being told no. She bit her lip. "As long as it's not one of those places where the menu doesn't have prices." "It is," he said easily, "but I've got you covered." The restaurant was a rooftop dining lounge in Midtown, lit by strings of golden lights and soft jazz. The hostess greeted Dean like royalty. Rae had never seen a place so beautiful, let alone eaten in one. "This is insane," she whispered, clutching the cloth napkin in her lap. You really eat here, sometimes, he said, watching her face. Usually when I want to impress someone, she shook her head. You don't need to impress me. You already returned my underwear. Dean choked on his wine, laughing. Noted, they talked for hours about her art, his real estate stuff, which he purposely downplayed, and her dream of opening a small gallery one day. Rae didn't hold back, didn't pretend to be someone she wasn't. And Dean. He listened, really listened, like he hadn't done in years. By the time he walked her back to the building, it was past midnight. She turned to him on the stoop. Thank you, Dean, for dinner, for being not a total weirdo. You're welcome. His voice was quiet now. Can I see you again? Rae blinked. Seriously? I don't usually ask twice, she studied him. I don't usually say yes to strangers with $1,000 watches, he grinned. I'll take that as a maybe. Then, without thinking, he leaned down and kissed her cheek just enough to make her breath catch. Good night, Rae. As he walked away, she stood frozen on the steps, heart pounding, suitcase forgotten at her feet. She had no idea that the man who just kissed her would change everything. Rae stood in front of the mirror in the cramped, urban bathroom, holding up her only decent dress, a soft, off-the-shoulder navy wrap she'd found at a second-hand boutique 2 months ago. It wasn't couture or anything close, but it hugged her waist and made her feel like someone who might belong at her rooftop restaurant, even if only for a night. She hadn't expected to hear from Dean again, but 2 days after their accidental dinner, he showed up outside the building just as she was coming back from a walk in Central Park. No warning, no message, just standing there in a charcoal coat and holding a white paper bag. You ever tried Dominique's? He asked, lifting the bag. They sell out of these croissants by noon. You looked like a breakfast person. Rae stared at him, stunned. You tracked down what I like to eat. You said your favorite smell was warm pastry. I put 2 and 2 together. I also said I hated mornings. That's why I'm here at noon. Now, standing in front of the mirror, she couldn't decide if she was nervous or just overwhelmed. Dean had invited her to an art exhibit downtown, something about emerging artists and a silent auction. He'd said it casually, like he wasn't inviting her into his world, but Rae knew better. She grabbed her coat, checked that her sketch pad was still in her tote, and headed down the stairs. Dean was waiting beside a sleek black car parked illegally at the curb, leaning against the door like he owned the sidewalk. The driver didn't say a word when Rae climbed in, just pulled smoothly into traffic as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Inside the car, Dean gave her a glance. You clean up well. You say that like I usually don't. I mean it as a compliment. Rae narrowed her eyes. You're not used to people calling you out, are you? He looked amused. Not really. The gallery was housed in a converted warehouse with huge windows and exposed steel beams. Inside, guests sipped champagne from fluted glasses and drifted past installations with names like Fractured Light and Urban Isolation. Rae clutched her tote tighter, overwhelmed by the sea of tailored suits and backless gowns. Dean leaned closer. You okay? I'm fine, just trying to blend. You don't need to blend, you're supposed to stand out. Easy for you to say. You probably own half of these people's mortgages. He raised an eyebrow. I'm not that bad. Yet here we are, she said, gesturing at the crowd. He didn't answer. Instead, he took her arm and guided her toward a white-walled space with a single painting, a stormy seascape with layered textures and a streak of gold that cut through the center like lightning. You like it? He asked, watching her instead of the canvas. I love it, she breathed. It feels like something you'd see behind your eyes after a bad day, but there's still light. It's hopeful without being fake. Dean didn't say anything right away. I'm bidding on it, he said finally. You're what? I want it. Because I said I liked it. No, he said. Because I did. Rae turned to him. Why are you doing this? What? Showing up, taking me places, buying paintings. You barely know me. Dean didn't look away. That's why I keep showing up, she swallowed. You don't have to impress me. I'm not trying to. I just want to see what happens when I stop living on autopilot. They didn't talk much after that. Rae wandered through the gallery, occasionally catching Dean's glance across the room. She noticed how people moved around him, deferential, careful, always watching. He was used to commanding attention without asking for it. But with her, he seemed to quietly step back, giving her space to breathe. Later, when the event ended and the winning bids were announced, Rae stood near the exit, sipping sparkling water. Dean approached with a folded slip of paper. "You bought it," she said before he even spoke. "I did. That painting probably cost more than my student loans. It was worth it." She shook her head, speechless. Outside, the air had turned colder. Dean walked her to the car again, but this time she didn't wait for him to open the door. "What's your angle?" she asked, turning to face him. He blinked. "I don't follow. Come on. Guys like you don't chase girls like me unless there's a catch. So what is it? You bored, looking for a fling with someone outside your circle?" Dean's jaw tensed. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think. You keep showing up, and I keep wondering when the other shoe's going to drop." He exhaled slowly. "There's no catch. Then why me?" "Because for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I have to pretend." Rae stared at him, her defenses wavering. "That's not fair." "What isn't? You say things like that and then expect me not to feel anything." He stepped closer. "I want you to feel something." She didn't reply. He didn't push. Instead, he opened the car door. She slid in, heart pounding, unsure if it was from the cold or the way he'd looked at her. When he dropped her off, he didn't follow her upstairs. He just leaned against the frame of the open door and said, "You'll be at the gallery tomorrow, right?" "I wasn't planning to. You should." "Why?" "Because the owner's looking for new artists to showcase, and I may have mentioned your sketchpad." Ray's lips parted. "Dean, I didn't show it to anyone," he added quickly, "but I told her you had something worth seeing." She stared at him, stunned. "You didn't ask," she said quietly. "I didn't need to." And just like that, he was gone again. Rae stood there on the sidewalk, heart rattling in her chest, wondering how a guy who lived in a world of marble floors and silent auctions could make her feel more seen than anyone ever had. The gallery owner, a woman named Sabine with severe cheekbones and an accent Rae couldn't quite place, tapped a manicured finger against her chin as she looked over Ray's sketchpad. Pages fluttered beneath her hand, revealing studies of urban windows, strangers caught in motion, and one half-finished portrait of a man with sharpened features and unreadable eyes. Sabine closed the book. "You see people clearly. That's rare." Rae stood rigidly beside her, breath held. "Thank you. I'm curating a new series. Local artists, real city grit, not polished abstractions." She glanced up. "If you're still in town next month, I'd like to include 3 pieces." Ray's voice caught in her throat. "Seriously?" Sabine didn't smile. "I never joke about wall space." Dean, who had been leaning against the far wall watching it all unfold, didn't say anything until they were outside. Rae clutched her tote to her chest like it might vanish if she let go. "She wants my work. I saw. I don't even live here. You could." She turned to him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged, but there was a flicker of something more behind his eyes. "You said you've been in between things." "Maybe this is the start of something." Rae stared at him. "I can't afford to live in New York. You don't have to figure everything out today." Wind whipped down the street, tugging at her coat. "I need to think." "I didn't ask you to decide anything. I wanted you to see what's possible." They walked in silence for a few blocks before Rae stopped next to a vendor cart selling roasted almonds. The scent was warm and sweet, and without thinking, she handed over a few dollars and took a paper cone. Dean glanced sideways. "You're full of contradictions. I get nervous when things go well." "Why?" "Because they usually don't last." He took one almond from her cone without asking. "Not everything has to fall apart." Rae studied him. "Do you believe that?" "I didn't," he said. "Not until last week." She didn't ask what had changed because she already knew. Later that evening, Rae stood alone on the balcony of Dean's penthouse. She hadn't expected to be there. After the gallery, he'd asked if she wanted to see the view, and she'd said yes before she could give herself a chance to panic. The city stretched beneath her in glittering lines. She leaned against the railing, heart thudding. Dean reappeared with 2 glasses and handed her one. "It's non-alcoholic. I figured you'd want a clear head." "Smart man," she said, sipping. He didn't respond. Instead, he watched her face like he was waiting for her to see something she hadn't noticed yet. "I've never stood this high above everything," she said softly. "It's quiet up here." That's why I like it. Down there, everyone expects something. Up here, I don't have to speak unless I want to. Rae turned to him. You don't seem like someone who minds being watched. I know how to perform. It's not the same as being known. She set the glass down, suddenly very aware of the space between them. Why me? Dean's voice was low. Because you didn't try to impress me. You didn't pretend to be anyone else. And when I told you the truth, you didn't flinch. You haven't told me much. I told you the part that matters. There was a pause that stretched too long. I'm not going to sleep with you just because you bought a painting and fed me almonds, Rae said, her tone even. Dean blinked. That's not why I brought you here. Then why? I wanted you to see where I live, not to show it off, to show you the part of me no one else gets. She didn't reply. I don't want a week with you, Rae, he added. I want more, and I know that's fast. But I don't do things halfway. Rae's chest tightened. I leave in 2 days. I know, she took a step back. That's not enough time to decide anything. I'm not asking for a decision. Then what are you asking for? A chance. He didn't touch her, he didn't move closer. He just let the words hang there, raw and real. Rae turned back to the city. Lights blinked across the skyline like heartbeats. I've never had someone put me first, she said, barely above a whisper. Not without asking for something back. You don't owe me anything? I don't want to be a story you tell at dinner parties. You already aren't. She looked at him again. His expression wasn't polished, it was stripped bare. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. That night, Rae didn't sleep. She lay on the narrow airbnb bed staring at the ceiling, her sketchpad beside her. The portrait she'd started of Dean was still unfinished. She turned on the light and picked up her pencil. She didn't stop drawing until the sun came up. The next morning, her phone buzzed. It was Sabine's assistant, asking for high-res scans of her work and confirming her spot in the upcoming exhibit. Rae stared at the message. Her hands were shaking. She didn't call Dean. She didn't tell him. Not yet. Instead, she packed her bag slowly. Her return flight loomed, but her mind was somewhere else. That afternoon, she walked to the gallery again. Sabine wasn't there, but one of the interns let her in. She stood in the center of the empty main room, sketchpad in hand. When she turned to leave, Dean was standing in the doorway. She didn't ask how he knew she'd come. He crossed the room slowly. I thought you might be here. I couldn't leave without seeing it one more time. Are you leaving? I don't know. Dean looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes, not certainty, not confidence. Something closer to hope. I want you to stay, he said, but not for me, for you. Rae swallowed. What if I fall for you and everything goes wrong? Then we deal with it together. She stepped toward him. I'm still terrified. He reached for her hand. So am I. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Rae didn't answer. She simply leaned forward and kissed him, not out of impulse, not because the moment demanded it, because for the first time in a long time she wanted to. Rae stood barefoot in her new studio and attic space above a florist's shop in Williamsburg that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old paper. Afternoon light poured through the skylight, illuminating the dust motes that floated between her and the blank canvas on the easel. A sketchpad lay open on the floor, pages curling at the corners from last night's humidity. She hadn't meant to stay, but everything had started shifting the moment she kissed Dean. Now, her return flight had come and gone. She hadn't told anyone in her hometown, not yet. The studio had come through Sabine's network, a miracle wrapped in peeling wallpaper and creaky floorboards. Rae had agreed to share the space with 2 other artists, both of whom had day jobs and only painted on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. A sliver of space in the city no one expected her to stay in. The door creaked behind her. I knocked, Dean said as he stepped inside, carrying a long rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. But you didn't answer. I was thinking, Rae said, not turning. This place makes it hard to stop. He set the package down gently on the wooden table. I figured you'd be here. You weren't at the gallery. I needed time. I didn't come to rush you. Rae finally looked at him. His jacket was dusted with pollen from brushing against the tulips downstairs, and his eyes looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before. What is it? She asked, gesturing to the package. He untied the string slowly. When the paper peeled back, it revealed the painting from the silent auction, The Stormy Seascape with the Streak of Gold. Ray's breath caught. You said it reminded you of what people see behind their eyes after a bad day, Dean said, but I had it reframed. Look. She stepped forward. The canvas was now bordered in a raw wood frame, unvarnished and rough at the edges. It looked like something pulled from a shipwreck. Beneath the painting, a small brass plaque had been added. Rae read it. To the woman who saw light before I did. I wanted to hang it in the penthouse, he said quietly, but I think it belongs here. You're giving it to me, I'm giving it back to us. Rae reached out and touched the frame. You reframed it. Sometimes we all need a different perspective. She stepped away from the canvas and faced him. This isn't what I expected, Dean, me either. I thought you'd go back to your life. That this would be a story we both kept to ourselves. I don't want to be a secret. She folded her arms, not in defense, but to keep herself grounded. What happens when things get hard? When you're expected at galas and I'm still figuring out how to pay rent. I don't care about galas. But they care about you. Your world, I don't want that world if you're not in it, Ray's voice softened. You say that now. I'll say it again in 20 years if you want me to. She didn't smile, not yet. I can't give you what you're used to. I don't want what I'm used to, I want you. Paint under your nails, mismatched socks, and that look you get when you're deciding if a color feels honest. Rae blinked. How do you see that? Because I watch you like you're the only thing in the room. Her composure cracked. I'm afraid I'm just a chapter. You're the whole book. She moved to him then, slowly, like a wave curling toward shore. What now? Dean reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver key, not fancy, not engraved, just a key on a plain ring. I bought the floor beneath this studio, he said. There's an empty space with tall windows and plumbing that doesn't work. I want to turn it into a gallery, for you, for the others Sabine won't take on, for anyone who doesn't fit. Ray's eyes widened. That's insane. It's a start. She looked down at the key in his hand. I don't need you to rescue me. I know, he said, but maybe I can walk beside you while you save yourself. There wasn't a sound in the studio except the creak of wood and the far-off hum of traffic. Rae took the key. Her hand closed around it like it meant something more than metal and promise. Okay, she said. Okay, she nodded, but I'm painting the walls myself. Deal. They left the studio together, hand in hand, walking down the stairs into the bright chaos of the sidewalk. Dean hailed a cab, but Rae tugged his arm. Let's walk, she said. I want to see the city through your eyes, he smiled, just once. I've been waiting to see it through yours. They crossed the street together, their shadows stretching behind them. Later that year, the gallery opened. Rae curated the first showcase, filling the raw white walls with work that pulsed with color and grit. At the launch, she stood in front of a crowd of artists, press, and strangers, wearing a simple black dress and paint-stained boots. Dean stayed in the back, watching her the way he always did, not possessive, not proud. Just full of something that had taken root long before either of them realized it. When she spoke, Rae didn't thank investors or sponsors. She thanked the man who once handed her the wrong suitcase and changed the direction of her entire life, and when Dean stepped into the light, she reached for him without hesitation. You still scared? He whispered. Every day, he kissed her temple. Good. That means it's real. And this time, when they stood together in the middle of the city, neither of them wanted to be anywhere else. The old storefront was finally finished. Rae stood outside with her fingers laced behind her head, staring up at the new sign. Trenton and Vance Gallery. The name had taken some convincing. She'd argued for something less personal, less vulnerable, but Dean had been firm. You built this, he'd said, brushing sawdust off her cheek during one of the late nights spent painting walls and arguing over lighting. If your name's not on it, it's not honest. Now it gleamed in brushed brass above the wide glass windows, reflecting the quiet street that had become their corner of the city. Inside, the final touches were being made. Rae had insisted on a long wooden bench in the center of the main room, not for aesthetic purposes, but because she wanted people to sit with the art, not just pass through. The walls held pieces by artists who hadn't yet been seen, and every single frame held a story. Dean stepped out behind her, brushing his hands on his jeans. The electrician's gone. We've got full power. Rae glanced over. And the espresso machine, he raised a brow. I'm not opening a gallery without caffeine. I still can't believe we're doing this. You mean you still can't believe you're doing this? She exhaled slowly. When I got on that plane back in December, I didn't think I'd be building a life here. Let alone with you. Dean leaned against the doorway beside her. You didn't build it with me, you built it, and I stayed out of the way. That's not true. Maybe, but I've never seen anyone take up space the way you do, Rae. You don't just enter a room, you change it. She turned, caught off guard by the softness in his voice. You're not exactly invisible yourself. I used to be, I just wore better suits. She stepped toward him, resting a hand on his chest. You don't have to impress me anymore. I know, he said. But I still want to. The opening was scheduled for the following evening, and invitations had already gone out. Rae hadn't let Dean pull strings, no press, no exclusive list, just an open door and a city full of people invited to walk through it. But that evening, with the space finally theirs and no one else around, Dean brought her to the center of the gallery and turned off the overhead lights. Only the soft glow from the display sconces remained, casting golden halos on the artwork. I have one more thing, he said. Rae narrowed her eyes. Please don't say you bought a billboard. Dean gave a low laugh. No billboards. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box, but it wasn't the kind Rae had expected. It wasn't jewelry, it was longer, narrower. You told me once you always wanted an old drafting pencil set. The kind architects used before everything went digital. Her breath caught. I had to track down a collector in Florence, he continued, opening the box to reveal a set of worn but beautiful mechanical pencils lined in silk. These were made by hand in the 1920s, still usable. She stared at them, speechless. Her fingers hovered over the polished wood, the brass tips. I thought you'd want to sketch the next chapter with something that's already made it through a century, he said. It was too much, and yet not at all. Rae didn't cry, not here, not now, but her voice came out raw. I don't know how you do it. Do what? Make me feel like I've mattered for longer than I've existed. Dean stepped closer. Because you have. To me, you've always existed. She looked up at him, lit by the soft glow of the gallery they'd built together. You didn't bring me here to change me. I brought you here to become someone with you. She kissed him, not in a rush, not in a haze of nerves or disbelief. She kissed him like she'd been waiting her whole life to know what it meant to be seen completely and loved anyway. The next day, the gallery opened. People came, students, couples, neighbors, tourists who wandered in off the street. They lingered, asked questions, bought prints. Rae stood at the edge of it all, watching the space breathe, and Dean stayed nearby, his hand at the small of her back. Sabine arrived near closing, nodded once in approval, and said nothing except, "It's right." That night they stayed late to clean up, but Rae didn't let Dean go home. She pulled him into the back room where her new canvas waited. I want to paint you, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Now. So he sat, still in his black shirt rolled to the elbows, and watched her mix paint. She didn't ask him to pose a certain way. She didn't tell him to move. She just started painting, eyes flicking from the canvas to his face and back again. Brush moving in long, confident strokes. When she was finished hours later, long after midnight, he stood and walked over to look. She hadn't painted him as the man the world saw. He wasn't polished. He wasn't guarded, he looked open, at peace. Loved, Dean turned to Rae, a slow breath moving through his chest. You didn't paint who I am. No, she said. I painted who you are when you're with me. He pulled her to him, and this time neither of them said anything. There was nothing left to say. They closed the gallery together that night, locking the doors with quiet reverence. Outside, the city pulsed, same as ever, but something between them had settled into permanence. Months passed. Rae's work was picked up by a downtown gallery, while Trenton and Vance became a staple in the neighborhood. Dean scaled back his corporate commitments, choosing instead to invest in independent creative spaces and education programs. He didn't do it for press, he didn't need it. He did it because he believed in what Rae saw in the world and in what she taught him to see in himself. On a quiet morning in late spring, Rae woke to find a note on her pillow. Not a text, not an email. A handwritten note folded neatly. It read, "Come upstairs." She blinked, sat up, and followed the trail of sunlight to the rooftop of their building, where Dean had set up a small table beside a mess of wildflowers in mismatched pots. He stood beside it in a white linen shirt and jeans, holding a ring not flashy, not oversized, just delicate and made with a vintage setting that looked older than both of them. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He simply asked, "Will you let me love you for the rest of my life?" Rae didn't hesitate. Yes. They married in the gallery that summer quiet, surrounded by canvases and the people who had watched them build something from nothing. Rae wore a dress she'd found at a vintage market. Dean wore a gray suit with a paint stain near the cuff. Neither of them cared. Afterward, they danced barefoot on the gallery floor. Years later, their children would ask how they met, and Rae would always tell the story the same way. "I stole the wrong suitcase," she'd say, "and it turned out to be the best mistake of my life." And Dean, standing behind her, would always add, "It wasn't a mistake, it was fate disguised as chaos." They never stopped building after that, not just galleries, a life, a love, a forever.